Good morning. Today is Monday, the 6th day of Cheshvan, and we continue in letter 26 in the Igeret Hakodesh. And yesterday we spoke about when with the Kabbalah, the Rebbe points out how it is necessary to understand and to learn it with Hasidus. Because when you study Kabbalah on your own, you may end up misunderstanding what it says there. So first, let's begin again with tzedakah, kadoila tzedakah, shemekareves hageula. And so the Alter Rebbe quoted a passage in the Zohar, and he asked a number of questions on this passage. He's talking about what will happen when the coming of Mashiach. And today we're going to continue more questions on this passage, and we will also get familiar with a few interesting facts about the birth and death in the time of Mashiach, and a number of other interesting facts. Now, the Zohar that we quoted yesterday, if you read it on face value, you take it at face value, it sounds very strange. It talks about that in the time of Mashiach, there will be those who are connected with the tree of life, and those who are connected with the tree of knowledge, which is mixed of good and bad. And it sounded like he's referring to the revealed part of the Torah, that there is mystical part of the Torah. The Kabbalah is considered the tree of life, and the revealed part of the Torah that talks about tumah, tara, impurity, and purity, kosher and not kosher, and so on, it is a mixture of good and bad. And he asked a number of questions. How could you say such a thing? We know the whole Torah is Eitz Chaim, is a tree of life. How could you say on the revealed part of the Torah that is a mixture of good and bad? God forbid. And he asked more questions. And he asked, we see in fact, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself, when he was hiding in the cave for 13 years, what was he studying there? He says he wasn't studying for 13 years the Kabbalah. That he could have done in a few, 2 or 3 months. Obviously, he was studying the whole entire Torah, the different parts of the Mishnah, the Gemara that talks about the impure and impure, and all of these details. That's what he was occupied for 13 years. And in fact, we have Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai mentioned, as the Alter Rebbe said, he's mentioned in every part of the Torah. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is mentioned. He had knowledge, vast knowledge in every little part, every corner of the Torah. Every part of the Torah he was knowledgeable fully. So most of the time he was occupied with this. So how could you say he would be occupied in things which is tree of knowledge mixed of good and bad? Chas v'shalom. Heaven forfend. In addition, he asked also the question what we have. We know the fact is, back in the days when it was those great sages that were occupied constantly with Torah study, they wouldn't even stop to pray. Although the prayer we know is mystical things, climbing up the spiritual ladder through prayer. And they, even when they would be occupied in simple laws of civil laws, nezikin, damages, they would not stop. Rabbi Yehuda would stop only once in 30 days. And again, this is not something that applies to today's day. We must pray, everyone. But those sages that all life was Torah, they would be occupied in studying Torah. And yet, what type of the Torah? The revealed part of the Torah. Because the mystical part of the Torah mostly was hidden. They were occupied mostly in the revealed part of the Torah. In today's lesson, Alter Rebbe continues to ask more questions about, if we read the Zohar in a simple meaning, and it sounds like in the time of Mashiach, those sages who connect with the spiritual, with the mystical part of the Torah, will not need to study the revealed part of the Torah. That means that people will not need to study the revealed, but then how would they know the laws? And certainly there are laws that we need to know even after the coming of Mashiach. The Torah doesn't change; the laws will remain. So let's see inside what the Alter Rebbe continues. Says the Alter Rebbe, "V'oid yesh lehafli hafli v'fele." There is yet further cause to be exceedingly amazed, in addition to what we just said. It says, Eich efsha sheliyemois HaMashiach lo yitztarchu leida hilchos isu ve'eta v'tumah v'tara. How is it possible that in the days of Mashiach, people will not need to know the laws of ritual prohibitions and permissions, and of the impurity and purity? That doesn't make sense, because we will need to know those laws. For how will they slaughter the sacrifices, and likewise animals for common use? You want to have a barbecue in your backyard when Mashiach comes, you still will need to get a shoichet and slaughter the animal in a kosher way. In order to slaughter the animal, you have to know all the details of how to do it. So imla yedu ilcha is drasa v'chalod v'sheiya poislim v'shchita p'gim as a sakin. How will they do it if they will not know the laws of drasa, chalada, and shehiyah? There are 5 things that we need to know, but the sheikhet needs to know. And he mentions 3 of them. Drasa. Drasa means when you take the knife, instead of slicing and cutting the shchita, it has to be a very, very sharp knife, obviously. And you have to slaughter the animal by moving the knife. It cannot be. Drasa means it's that you pressure instead of cutting. That makes it not a kosher shechita. Chalada means if the knife hides under the skin, between the pipes. Shia means if you start and then you wait, you don't do it at one time. So all of these laws, basically, one will need to study in order to know them, any of which disqualifies the slaughtering. And also b'gimas asakin, and likewise the laws regarding a defective knife. The knife has to be very, very sharp without any blemish. So those laws had to check him. Says Alter Rebbe, "V'chi voled ish betivo she'esheichel b'shei udrasa." Will there ever be born a man who by his very nature will invariably slaughter without shehi and drasa? This is not something that you're born with. You have to learn it. Also, will the knife remain perfect and unblemished forever? You have to fix it. It's going to be a physical world. There are also many more laws relating to sacrificial offerings and so on, such as those regarding the fat, the blood. There's certain fats that you're not allowed to eat. The blood, is laws how to extract the blood and remove, and other prohibitions. So obviously those things will be there even in the time of Mashiach. Also, regarding the laws of impurity to the dead, because the Alter Rebbe brings a verse that talks about that even after the coming of Mashiach, there will be death. People will live much longer, and when a person will pass away, at the age of 100, it will be considered like a child passed away. That's what the Alter Rebbe continues here. He says, "V'gam tumas ameis yitzichim leida." People will also need to know the laws regarding the impurity imparted by a corpse. Kedichsiv ana ben me'er shana yamus. As it is written, a young man will die at the age of 100. So if he dies at the age of 100, will be considered like he's a young child that died. Nah, a child, a lad, he calls him. So obviously, we will need to know those laws as well. Not only that, says the Alter Rebbe, there's also the laws of the impurity of a woman who gives birth. Says the Alter Rebbe, "Megam tumas yeledes tzarich leida." It will also be further necessary to know the laws governing the impurity of a woman who has given birth. Now, here's something interesting. What it says that there will be birth, but everything will be also in a way that the laws of the impurity, when a woman has the cycle and blood comes out, and then she is considered impure, and you need to know all the laws regarding. But what it says is interesting. It says, as it is written, a pregnant woman and one who gives birth together will be among those restored to the Holy Land at the time of the redemption through Mashiach. And then he says, "Im teled isha b'chol yom mebia achas." If a woman will give birth every day, these successive births resulting from one marital union. Now today, there is a gap. There's a gap between giving the birth and it says why is that the laws of impurity? When there's holiness, there can be impurity. Meaning, when there is birth, not everything from the not everything from the father becomes a newborn child. There's parts of it that go and become turn into blood. So in a way, it causes a lack of purity, because there's a lack of life there. A life that was potential, could have been life, and now it's not. However, it says when Mashiach will come, there will be the concept that the woman will become impregnated by the husband. And from one conception, from one union, marital union, there will be more than one birth. So we can have birth coming in multiple days from one union. Because obviously it cannot mean that the child, it says everything will happen fast, yes, but it cannot mean that a woman will give birth every day by being together every day and having a child right away. That cannot be the case. Why? Because we know that when a woman gives birth, she is not allowed to be with her husband for a period of 7 days. If it's a boy, if it's a girl, maybe a period of 14 days. So those laws will still apply there. And therefore, he says that there will be birth from a single union, will be multiple births. But the bottom line, so that's an interesting fact that the Alter Rebbe brings here. The bottom line, what he brings this fact is to teach us that there will still be the laws of impurity, and those are the laws that we will need to know. So again, back to the question, how could you say that when the coming of Mashiach will have only the spiritual, the tree of life, we call it the mystical part of the Torah, the tree of life, we will need to learn the entire Torah, the laws of purity and impurity. That's what it says. Nevertheless, the laws with respect to the restrictions resulting from her impurity will not change. And Alter Rebbe concludes and says, there is no need to dwell on something so obvious. And it's so obvious that the entire Torah will be something that we'll always study. When the entire Talmud and the Midrashim make known the reverse of the misleading impression formed by superficial reading of our opening quotation from the Zohar, from the Raya Memne. As we see throughout the Talmud, it says the Porich Hilchas el Mashiach. For example, the question is asked a law for the time of Mashiach. So we see that in the time of Mashiach we will have the laws. Another quote that says, we find likewise that Elijah will come to clarify all doubts. Many times in the Talmud, there are certain questions that end up with a statement that says, Teiku. It's not known, we don't know the answer. And one of the commentaries on the word Teiku is that this is an abbreviation of the words Tishbi Yetaretz Kushiyas Ve'abayas, which means Elijah, we call him Eliyahu Tishbi. He will bring answers to all the questions that we didn't have any answers. So we see that we will still learn those laws in the time of Mashiach. In addition to that, Alter Rebbe further asks another question, what we learned in the reading of the Zohar, that says there, as you remember, that in the time now, in these days, the sages who are considered like Shabbos, they need to be fed by the MOSHIACH, by the illiterate people. And therefore, they need to learn the laws of impurity and impurity. Just like Shabbos needs the weekdays to prepare food so you can eat on Shabbos. But when Mashiach comes, it says that the Talmidei Chachamim, the sages, will no longer need to be fed by the illiterate people. They will eat directly from the tree of life. So the Alter Rebbe is going to ask, but wait a second, is this the first time that we find that sages were financially independent, were not dependent on the illiterate people? We find throughout the history in the time of the Second Temple, where sages were wealthy, they had fields, they were not dependent on them, and yet they did learn the laws of purity and impurity. That's the question that the Rebbe is going to ask. Also, is not understandable is the statement, the statement in Raya Memne that we quoted that said that the Torah scholars will not be sustained by the illiterate people and so on. Nor by the mixed multitude who eat that which is ritually unfit, impure, and prohibited heaven forfend. Says the Alter Rebbe, that this is the big thing that will happen when Mashiach comes. That's already happened in the time of the Second Temple. Even during the time of the Second Temple, they were not supported by the illiterate people who ate that which is ritually unfit and prohibited heaven forfend. Because the Torah scholars, they had fields and vineyards of their own, just like the illiterate people. And that fact that they were independent of the illiterate people didn't cause them didn't make them not to learn the laws of impurity. On the contrary, they were constantly learning those laws. Nevertheless, they engaged in the study of the laws of Isur and Heter, the forbidden and the permissible, and of impurity and purity. For example, all the pairs of leading sages who lived at the time of the Second Temple, and they raised disciples in the legal aspects of the Torah, in the thousands and tens of thousands. While the study of the esoteric of the Torah, the mystical part of the Torah, the Kabbalah, took place in secret and so on. So obviously, Alter Rebbe concludes that you need to know how to understand the Zohar properly. And the answer, tomorrow, Alter Rebbe, God willing, will give the answer. We'll start giving the explanation. So join us tomorrow. Bezrat Hashem, we'll have the answer. All the best. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.